You have this also. Yeah. That's it. What? 50. You guys are trash before not. Well, I meant don't.
And I was trying to explain to you about it.
They did not have to run that out. I was good at doing it. Wait. Oh, I see. Not bad.
All right, folks. Let's go ahead and find our seats. Get some more dramatic lighting going. Maybe even lower. There we go. A hush descends. I said a hush descends. Hi, everyone. Welcome. So good to see you all. This is the kickoff to our spring lecture series. So pleased that in this iteration, we are kicking it off with a key distinguished professor lecture. So that's a real thrill. I do have a few housekeeping notes here. I want to announce a few kind of upcoming important dates here in the next couple of weeks. But real quick, if for any student in the room, if you've not scanned that QR code, please do that right now. That's going away. The first thing I want to note is that in a couple of weeks, specifically March 8th to March 11th, we'll be visited by the National Architectural Accreditation Board. They'll be sending a team to accredit the graduate architecture program. This is the first time this is happening since 2017, our successful visit in 2017. And so it's been about, what's the math on that, 8 or maybe even 9 years. But this is a very important event in the life of every architecture school in the United States that's accredited. And there is a role for students to play, for graduate students specifically. As I've mentioned to you in my emails that I've been pumping out to you guys, there are going to be 2 meetings that the NAB team is going to have with students. One in which all graduate students are invited on March 9th from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock. That's in the Dean's Conference Room. So the visiting team is a team of 4 people, a practitioner, a practicing architect, a student actually, and another academic as well. And so those 4 will sit with any interested graduate students to talk about your experiences in the program, your thoughts about the program. So that's happening from 3 to 4. There's a second meeting for invited graduate student leaders. And if you've gotten an email from me, you're invited. And if you haven't, you're not going to be part of that meeting. But there's something like 12 students that'll join in that meeting. So I'm putting this up here to put it on your radar that this is a super important event, and to talk more about it with you, to give you more information, to help you get more informed. We're going to have a town hall that's specifically going to cover content and thoughts about what's going to be going on in this NAB site visit. That town hall is on March 2nd. That's on Monday from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock in the Great Space. So I do hope you'll turn out and hear more about that. We may even be graced with a visit from our NCARB licensing advisor. NCARB licensing advisor. Do you guys know who the NCARB licensing advisor is? Britt Williams, that's right. Britt Williams is our NCARB licensing advisor. Let me say it again. Britt Williams is our NCARB licensing advisor. Just let that wash in, soak in. Okay. Good. So more information about NAB coming up, but please do keep that on your radar. It's a really important thing. I do want to also note that next week, the gallery in the Keibel Gallery will be opening the new exhibit, In the Shadow of the Cloud, Reimagining the Technical Landscapes of Northern Virginia. Ali Fard from the University of Virginia, who curated the exhibit, is going to be there giving a short talk. It's going to be food and it's going to be fun. After studio next Wednesday. So keep that on your radar. I don't know if you've taken a peek at some of the models and drawings in there. It looks really, really cool. And one more event I want to put on your radar. This is a very special thing. The Embassy of the Czech Republic reached out to us to let us know that there's a new feature-length documentary coming out called Czechoslovak Architecture from 58 to 89. And that one of the writers and producers of the documentary, Vladimir Bros, is going to be here. We're going to screen this documentary. And that's going to happen on March 9th from 5:30 to 8 o'clock right here in this room. I've taken a peek at the trailer. Looks like there's some really interesting buildings that are going to be kind of discussed and are part of the documentary. And I know that many of you in the room, your kind of interest in the intersection of architecture and cinema has been piqued in part by taking Peter Noonan's architecture and cinema course. So I'm speaking specifically to you all who have been kind of gotten interested in that topic. This could be an event that's right up your alley. So expect to see some more emails and information coming out about this, but I do encourage you to go. I should also say, again, Vladimir Bros, one of the producers of this kind of passion project film, will be here discussing it, and we're going to screen the entire film as well. Okay. So those are upcoming events. I do want to note and say thank you again to Potomac Valley AIA for their continuing support of our lecture series and all the special ways they help us out. Thank you to them. Now, to pivot to the event of today, the key distinguished professor lecturer. We're so pleased to be joined by Alan Rix. And Alan has joined an impressive list of academics and practitioners reaching back all the way to 1967. If you start scanning this list, a lot of names will probably really start to jump out. We've got Eisenman and Rowe and Corin Sharples, and even last year, Nader Tehrani was here as well. So there's a really long kind of esteemed history here. And one of the amazing things, of course, about the key distinguished professor position is that, of course, not only do they come and give a lecture, but they spend time kind of embedded in our studios. And Architecture 600 last semester was so fortunate to have Alan Rix joining and spending time in the studio, giving desk crits, joining reviews. So that was such a great opportunity for our community. And with that, I'd like to now invite Britt Williams to come up to give a proper introduction of Alan Rix.
As Michael mentioned, in Architecture 600, 611 last semester, we had the distinct pleasure of with Alan. He came and joined the studio several times. He gave a lecture, joined reviews, and also met with students one-on-one. Alan Rix is the founding principal and co-executive director of MASS, an organization that believes a more just and beautiful future is ours to create. Rooted in leading research and deep local knowledge, MASS creates civic spaces that set new standards for design excellence. Alan's recent projects exemplify this mission, including the Rwanda Institute for Conservation Agriculture, the world's first climate-positive university campus, and the New Lots Branch Library in Brooklyn, which translates remembrance into belonging. These and other works embody MASS's belief that architecture can nurture well-being, foster belonging, and advance collective flourishing. Under his leadership, MASS has grown into an interdisciplinary collective of more than 100 professionals working across Africa, North America, and beyond. And MASS's design labs turn insights into sustained movements for systemic change. MASS has been named Firm of the Year by the American Institute of Architects and received the National Design Award for Architecture from the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. Alan is an international fellow of the Royal Institute of British Architects and a young global leader of the World Economic Forum. He was appointed by the governor of Massachusetts to the Designer Selection Board to select firms for state-funded work, where he served 2 terms and also was the chair. He holds a Master of Architecture from the Harvard Graduate School of Design and Bachelor of Arts from Colorado College, where he was also bestowed an honorary doctorate of fine arts degrees. So please join me in welcoming Alan Rix.
Hey, can everybody hear me okay? It's great to be back on campus. I was sitting there reading the land acknowledgement and part of it, which I thought was different than ones I normally see. that said it is their historical responsibility to advocate for the four-legged, the winged, those that crawl and those that swim. They remind us that clean air and pristine waterways are essential to all life, which is a nice introduction, I think, for the talk tonight. And I want to start with a premise that kind of aligned with that, maybe feels obvious, but is still not fully reflected in how we design, build, and value architecture. That people's prosperity and the planet's prosperity are inseparable. When biodiversity collapses, the consequences don't stay out there in nature. They show up as public health crises, food crises, climate crises, displacement crises, crises of everyday life. This talk, I hope, is an invitation into a different frame of abundance, but abundance not as excess, not as endless growth, but as balance. So if abundance is balance, what does it mean to design for it materially, ecologically, socially, and culturally? In architectural culture, we often are offered a set of false choices. Design excellence sits on one side and care for people and planet sits on the other. And I think there is even a strand within our own field that suggests that we might need to return to a kind of disciplinary purity, formal innovation, technological novelty, and disengage from the social and environmental concerns. But that framing depends on binaries that are neither true nor useful. In our practice, constraints can be generative. When you take provenance seriously, and by that I mean where materials come from, who benefits, what ecosystems are touched, you don't get weaker architecture. You often get more inventive architecture, new forms of collaboration, new construction methods, and new aesthetics that are rooted in place and labor. The question is, how do we build work that is performatively and aesthetically innovative, that views beauty not as luxury, but as a reflection of dignity? Abundance is having a moment. We started talking about abundance years ago, before Ezra Klein's book and before it became a trend. And I don't mean it in exactly the same way. We mean it to be something very specific, rooted in the ecological definition. And it's not about limitless growth. It's not about more. In ecology, a species becomes abundant when its population is stable and in harmony with its surroundings, having enough resources without depleting the resources of others. Abundance is a way to name the future that is neither denial nor despair, a practice of balance, or to put it another way, having enough of what we need. Kate Raworth is an economist in the UK who developed the concept of donut economics. It gives a simple, powerful concept of two boundary conditions: a social foundation, the minimum needs for dignity and opportunity, within the planetary ceiling, the limits that keep Earth systems functioning. You've probably heard of these planetary limits. And it's between these two boundaries that exists a safe and just space for society. And I'd like to translate that into an architectural brief. Can we design projects that raise the floor, health, belonging, opportunity, without breaking that planetary ceiling? And if we admit that construction inevitably has a footprint, can we pair building with conservation and regeneration so that the net trajectory bends towards flourishing? For decades, our industries have focused on solving this through kind of reducing operational energy, and that work continues to matter. But it's not enough. Our materials, supply chains, extraction practices, and land use choices carry enormous ecological consequences. And if we reduce embodied carbon dramatically, construction still leaves a footprint. So the pivot is not just measuring less harm, but reframing the ambition, designed to heal ecologically, socially, culturally. And that word heal isn't metaphorical, it's literal. It's through a lens and a concept we take from public health, the notion of one health, the idea that human, animal, and ecosystem health are inextricably linked. 16 years ago, we founded MAST based on a conviction that architecture could be a tool for justice, not a symbol, but a tool. And we learned early on, alongside long-term partners, that design is never neutral. It can reinforce inequality or help repair it. It can extract or regenerate. As climate inequity, public health, and displacement continue to intensify, the world demands a broader practice, but the through line stays the same. We refuse the false choice between beauty and service. In the contemporary discourse in more recent years, since we started, there has been a positive trend of activism, talking about regeneration, decolonial critique, as exhibited in the last few Venice Biennales, most clearly in Leslie Loco's. I'm happy to see that there is a substantive shift towards these topics and questions. And yet much of this exists in the world of ideas, speculative and academic, outside the messy realities of project delivery systems and markets that are necessary to bring these ideas to scale. So we've built an interdisciplinary practice designed to work on long-term, ambitious projects, often having to seek financing creatively, and accompanying partners from the earliest notions of an idea well beyond the day projects open. Tonight, I'm going to focus on the ideas we've written about in the book Seeking Abundance, Design, Ecology, and a Flourishing Planet, which comes out next month. It was written with Sierra Bainbridge and contributions from dozens of collaborators at MAST, but also people outside of MAST from the field, not even just designers, but writers, artists. A number of photographers collaborated, and even a Rwandan chef. The work is rooted in a few different ideas. First, this idea that seeking implies motion, refusing to settle for what is, pursuing what could be. Second, this idea of abundance as balance, ecological, social, and material. And third, landscapes that aren't just context. Landscapes are source. They shape where we build, why we build, what we build with, and what we owe back to the ecosystems and communities that make building possible. We structured the book around 3 different ecologies because ecology is not just a backdrop. It's an active system that buildings participate in. What would it mean for architecture to be accountable to the ecosystem it occupies and the ecosystems it touches through the materials and labor that contribute to it? Go up. Yeah, that's right. I thought it seemed like. So the first project on the left is in the Congo Basin, the Ilima Primary School. And the second project is in the Savannah Woodland, the Rwanda Institute for Conservation Agriculture. And the last project is in the Afro-Montane Forest, the Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund campus. Ilima is deep in the Congo Basin, one of the most isolated contexts you can imagine. And that isolation forces a different design intelligence. You can't assume standard details, typical construction logistics, or industrial supply chains. This region is ecologically fragile and under pressure. Extraction, migration, rapid change. So the project isn't only elementary school, it's a test. How to build within ecological limits while elevating craft, culture, and dignity. It taught us that scarcity of resources can produce abundance of inventiveness if you treat constraints as a partner rather than an obstacle. The Congo Basin is home to the endangered bonobo ape, one of our closest relatives, and one of the most threatened by development and agricultural expansion. The mission of the Alima School extends beyond education. It's designed to provide agricultural training and building an understanding of the value of conservation. This is a trailer for a film we made called Made in Alima about the project, and it'll give you a sense of the process, the constraints, the collaboration, and what it actually looks like to build in one of the most remote places on Earth. At the beginning of the project, a couple of my colleagues at Mass journeyed to Alima, which requires getting to Kinshasa, taking a propeller plane to a very small town in the middle of the country, and then riding 5 hours by motorcycle on a single track trail to inventory not only the ambitions of the client and understand what the community was looking for, but to try and assess what materials and labor resources might exist there. And we ultimately developed this matrix looking at a number of the different materials we could use against things like lifespan, maintenance, the ability to procure them. Was it worth putting on a barge going up the river to be delivered by bicycle versus trying to make things on site? Ultimately, trying to form this assessment of cost, performance, and ecological impact from different material systems in the region. There's a sense that serious social ecological work should also be the bare minimum. Maybe it should look austere, or that ornament and detail are indulgent. But we would argue the opposite, that ornament is not excess, it is actually the evidence of care. Detail is not decorative, it is dignifying. And in Alima, craft is not just a choice, it's a social and material reality. You design with what's available, with the hands and knowledge that are present, and that craft then becomes visible. The building shows how it's made, and in doing so shows respect for labor and place. That's the beginning of an idea of aesthetic, of ethics. And this brings us to a key method in the book, designing from the supply chain outward. Instead of starting with form and then selecting materials and processes to match, we ask what materials can reveal about possibility. What histories do they carry? Who can build with them? Who benefits? And what ecosystems they touch? That this idea of a lens of provenance becomes the bridge to the next ecology and project. The Rwanda Institute for Conservation Agriculture, or RICA for short, is a conservation agriculture campus in the savanna woodland ecology in Rwanda. It becomes a case for moving beyond sustainability as a checklist towards performance that is both ecological and systemic. Not just how efficient is the building, but what does the building do to the systems it sits within and draws from? At this scale, performance isn't only energy, it's measured in soil health, biodiversity, water, livelihoods, and long-term resilience. And again, tied to this notion of provenance, the materials, labor, and culture it comes from. This is the photographer Gael van de Weg, a friend, ecologist, a photographer, Many of the nature images you see today, he photographed. He travels across the continent and has deep knowledge, looking at it both from the macro level of a helicopter as well as the micro level of insects and plants. And he understands this intimately, that deforestation, climate change, urban sprawl, like you see here in the city of Kigali in tension, that has increased human-wildlife interactions across Central Africa. Heightening health risks from zoonotic diseases like Ebola. His argument is clear. Integrated policies that consider conservation of biodiversity alongside sustainable agriculture and urban planning are essential for disease prevention and long-term resilience. RICA became a test bed of those ideas, of how an institution could align food systems, biodiversity, and health into one coherent campus and landscape. But RICA's story begins with a bird. This is the gray-crowned crane. It's one of the most amazing, beautiful species in East Africa, now endangered with fewer than 2,000 left in the country. The cranes roost in these acacia trees in the evening and forage for food in the papyrus wetlands throughout the day. When these systems are intact, you can hear it. A full soundscape of insects and birds, a functioning ecology, where landscapes have roots that fix nitrogen, stabilize and enrich the soil, and filter the water before it reaches the lake. But agricultural fields now push into the wetlands and erosion clouds the lakes. And productive soils are being lost faster than they can regenerate. When these systems cease to function, the landscape goes silent and productivity decreases. And this is indicative of what's happening across Rwanda. Over the past 30 years, the land has been cleared for farming, grazing, and firewood. The population has grown from 3 million people in 1960 to 14 million today in a country the size of Rhode Island, and is projected to reach over 20 million in the coming decades, putting extraordinary pressure on the land. You can see, the green represents forest and grassland in 1990, and not even 30 years later, it has almost all been converted to farmland, putting extraordinary pressure on the land. So the question we faced was simple but urgent. How can one piece of land support twice as many people and without destroying the systems that sustain it? At RICA, we discovered that the site contained one of the largest intact savanna woodlands left in the country. You can see on the left side of the screen. It was the gray-crowned crane's former habitat, a living reminder that agriculture, biodiversity, and human survival are intertwined. Through extensive mapping of soils, slopes, hydrology, we determined the highest and best use of each part of the site. Fertile soils were reserved for student farms, disturbed areas became building zones, and the intact savanna woodland, of course, the area of greatest biodiversity, was left untouched. We reconnected it to the papyrus wetlands and the lake's riparian edge, letting ecological processes determine the spatial plan of the campus. When you literally propagate a campus, you are not only instigating processes, you are uplifting the species collected there. In this case, the campus is a research plot, a seed bank, an arboretum for agricultural collections, and a nursery for native species. We started the project by bringing in an ecologist to develop this entire map of not only what was there, but what could be there in the future if we were able to restore biodiversity. With local partners, we propagated roughly 1 million native plants, starting from seed and cuttings collected on site. We designed the plant palette to catalyze those future habitats. This is a succession diagram showing how you begin in order to bring back the gray-crowned crane, building this all the way back to where it could come back into the habitat. Every layer of planting was chosen to invite wildlife back, a turn from a quiet site into a thriving campus. This is abundance made visible, not an abstract idea, but a measurable transformation of land and life. And our tasks on the building design side of this was to extend that intelligence of the landscape into the built form. Each building was sited and oriented to respond to the equatorial sun, long east-west axes that capture prevailing breezes and minimize heat gain. Butterfly roofs collect rainwater for irrigation and gray water use, turning every roof into a watershed. The stone plinths reference soil strata, the earthen walls and timber frames breathe. We wanted the buildings to feel grown from the land rather than placed upon it. The structure of RICA is deliberately elemental. Stone foundations, compressed earth walls, timber trusses, and terracotta tile roofs fired locally with agricultural waste. These materials are low carbon, renewable, and part of Rwanda's vernacular memory. They show that a modern academic campus can be built with the same ecological influence that sustains its landscape. About a third of the way into the construction process, the original contractor went bankrupt. Rather than pause, we hired all 2,500 of their workers and went back to work the following week. That decision turned a potential crisis into an opportunity for ownership of the process. Because we controlled procurement, we could trace every material from its point of extraction to installation. It meant fair labor and transparent supply chains. We ended up engaging more than 85 different cooperatives across Rwanda to produce all of the furniture and finishings, everything from lighting and furniture to woven ceilings and ceramic products and light pendants. We used a variety of fiber materials with weaving cooperatives and from farmers, papyrus, sisal, banana fiber. Materials long used in baskets and mats found new life as agricultural finishes. This is architecture as infrastructure for human capacity, working with Willaris, a kind of quasi-godfather of ceramics in the country, to move from making bowls to tile for our bathrooms and kitchens. Proof that beauty and equity can emerge from the same act of making. Every design decision becomes an economic, ecological, and pedagogical investment. From the hands that made the tiles to the policies those tiles would later inspire. Ultimately, 98% of the labor on the project was sourced within 100 miles. And over 96% of the materials came from within Rwanda. Stone and soil from the site itself, clay fired in nearby kilns, timber from sustainably managed forests and plantations, and ironwork from regional fabricators. All told, this meant that an overwhelming majority of the $75 million it cost to build this project went into the local economy. We measured the embodied carbon of every system, and conventional concrete and steel structures in East Africa, like the ones that you can see on the diagram on the left, average roughly double RICA's embodied carbon footprint. It's through this local sourcing and earthen materials that we're able to cut that in half while keeping most of that money in the local economy as well. The influence of RICA now extends far beyond the boundaries of the campus. In a country that had actually outlawed the use of earthen construction, it established a precedent that would become a national policy. It strengthened supply chains for forestry and ceramics. It expanded curricula that now merges conservation agriculture with material science. After the government officials visited for the opening, they formed a working group with us to actually update the building code and develop best practices for kind of local adobe block construction that's now used in housing across the country. A major lesson here is that abundant design is both technical and human. It requires prototyping and iteration, humility, and learning in public. And we don't always know what will work. So we test, we measure, and share what we learn so that hopefully others can adopt it and adapt it. RECA becomes a template for design decisions about materials and land, and hopefully becomes a model, a way to teach, employ, steward, and restore. The third project that I want to share with you is the Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund campus. It sits in an Afro-montane forest ecology at the intersection of the preserved forest, a national park on the left, and the competing landscape of agriculture and population growth. For the Fossey Fund, biodiversity is not an abstraction, it's the whole point. On this campus, architecture supports species, research, education, and local livelihoods while being accountable to the forest itself. So the question becomes, can a building behave like a part of that living system, reducing harm, but also enabling stewardship and regeneration? One of the most honest challenges in this work is time. It takes a long time to build these, design and build these projects, to build trust, to repair landscapes, to shift systems. And that's perhaps the paradox of imagining and creating an abundant future, is that it's built in small decisions, but will be judged across generations. There is a kind of prevailing aesthetic today of sleek, minimal digital that can flatten cultural specificity and erase these details. And our proposal is not a nostalgic one, but one that cares for the legibility of craft. Buildings that reveal their intent, where materials carry meaning, where detail honors labor and tradition. And that innovation includes material science, new construction methods, sustainability strategies, participatory processes, theory, pedagogy, and novelty isn't automatically good, just as the language of social impact isn't automatically sufficient. It means holding multiple criteria at once. A unique thing about all three of these projects is that we also built all three of them, which is not necessarily true for most of our portfolio, but here we were the contractor as well, which again allows us to curate the entire building process, to focus on ethical labor and procurement, as well as create opportunities for training. With the Fossey Fund, we made one of the objectives to increase gender equality representation in the construction trades. Almost a quarter of this team of over 1,500 people were women, far above the average in most job sites everywhere, but including Rwanda. And in a more unique case here, we were able to work with a grant from the German Development Bank to actually have a training program in a handful of different trades where over 200 workers received certifications at the end of the process. The landscape here, you can see this kind of degraded agricultural landscape I've talked about before in the foreground. But yet in the background, you have these amazing volcanoes where that silverback gorilla lives, the only place on the planet where the mountain gorillas are. And because of that elevation gain, you actually have these incredibly unique microclimates that make their way up the volcano. So the objective of the campus was to actually be able to teach people who might not ever make it up to the volcano about all those different systems and about what gorillas eat. And but also this idea that we could actually build back biodiversity even on this relatively modest site. And the scientists that work for the Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund, the people that actually know about this, they're actually pretty skeptical about this idea that on such a small site you could have this kind of impact. But they were up for trying it. So much like Rika, we had to procure and proliferate all of these different species. Over 200 different types of plants and trees were sourced, often from different parts of the country within national parks. One of the challenges of one of our landscape architects, Joe Christa, who's featured here on the left, one of the only landscape architects in Rwandan landscape architects in the world. There's fewer than 10. She was tasked with identifying all of these, which were given to her by a list of scientists with their Latin names, and then trying to like Google image search what is that, and then often mislabeled, working with locals, identifying like how they're locally classified, and then having to search around the country to find them. We didn't know how it would work, how many would survive. Would it actually start to repair and bring back life? I'm going to play a short film that talks about that process called A Tenth of the Time. I got to make a switch here.
These 12 acres at Volcanoes National Park's edge have become a model that demonstrates how biodiversity can return, not in centuries, but in seasons. In Rwanda, this forest once ran unbroken. Over time, farmland and eucalyptus plantations pressed in, narrowing habitat and pushing wildlife inside park boundaries. Outside the line, species thinned. What conditions call forth abundance, life and balance, humans and the natural systems we rely on? We began by understanding what should be here, working with the Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund, which advances conservation as a complex, collective commitment to endangered species and future generations. Our team at Mass designed their campus as a living laboratory to foster biodiversity by regenerating the land. We set out to find, collect, and propagate over 120 native species from the 5 surrounding mountain ecologies. Framework species first, fast, hardy, and generous, so the rest could follow. There were no nurseries for these plants, so we built the flows of care from scratch, sourcing cuttings and seed and turning the nursery into a test kitchen for what works. Community members were invited to help, given field guides, growing conditions, and images to aid the search, which expanded from the site outwards. The result? Over 300,000 native plants were propagated and the subsequent planting completed within 6 months. 2 years on, more than 95% of the plants continue to thrive. But the real innovation wasn't just what we grew, it's how. The nursery fed a seed bank of species, methods, and training. This isn't about fencing people out, it's about inviting livelihoods in, from community propagation and planting to stewardship that fits farming. Regeneration here means human presence, but with different intent. Restoration only scales if people can do it close to home, with their tools, in their language. We built durable structures from local volcanic stone, surfaces that living systems can claim. Walls become trellis and shade, roofs sprout. Architecture serves as an ally to habitat. Water systems are quietly choreographed to slow, soak, and clean, supporting plants first, infrastructure second. It's a holistic lesson that stays simple. Life creates conditions conducive to life. Since completion, the Fosse Fund and its research partners have monitored the site to understand biodiversity response. Within months, native fauna returned. Researchers documented 52 bird species, rising complexity in calls, rhythms, and song. And we've only just begun. These aren't just signs of recovery, they're a blueprint. To meet our moment, we must design the links between the built and the grown. Worldwide, we have to restore faster than we've harmed. This is possible with science anyone can use and with communities rooted in place.
So if you want abundance, you can't only redesign buildings. You often have to redesign the institutions that produce buildings and a practice that needs the capacity to do long-term partnership, to build evidence, to deliver with accountability, and to share templates that others can adapt. And to connect those projects to policy and markets over time. The structure of our practice is not separate from design. It is one of the design decisions. So if abundance is balance, designing for enough across ecology and society, landscape is a source, shaping sites, supply chains, and social futures. Provenance is our method, design from the supply chain outward. And beauty is dignity. Detail is care, ethics visible in form. And the long horizon where systems change take time. Share what we learn so others can adapt and scale. This book is not a conclusion, it's an invitation. Seeking, as I said, implies motion, a refusal to settle for what is in pursuit of what could be. We're not naive about the impediments, the challenges we face, the market incentives, the policy failures, the short-termism that dictates how most decisions are made. But in these projects, we've also seen what's possible when design is treated as a tool of dignity and landscapes are treated as living systems that we're accountable to. So my closing challenge is simple. Don't accept the false choices. Don't choose between beauty and justice. Don't choose between innovation and responsibility or between theory and practice, but build the integrated thing, then share it. So abundance becomes not a slogan, but a reality. Thanks.
You have another mic? Just on. Okay, good. Thank you so much, Alan. I'm going to turn it over to questions from you all. Where should we start? Anyone have a thought? Yes. I'll come back to you now.
Thank you. I was really impressed by a lot of these products, especially the use of vernacular materials and technologies. And so I was wondering where you as an architect gain the knowledge to know so much about how to utilize these vernacular technologies that might not be so popular in both the world and also the countries where you're working?
Yeah, thanks. A good question. So two of the three projects are in Rwanda, which is where NAS was founded. We started going there as students volunteering in 2007 and had full-time staff there a couple of years later. And it's over, that almost 20 years that we've kind of acquired that knowledge. So, a project like RECA is taking advantage of almost 15 years of R&D, but investing even more into it. And so we've been able to develop this massive network of artisans and makers from whom we learn, whether it's the masons that have worked with that volcanic stone or the weavers that are working with all those different fibers. In Rwanda, there was not an architecture school when we first started working there. There were fewer than 10 architects. So the first graduates of the school, I think, graduated in 2014. The graduates, two of the graduates of that class are now leadership of our office there. And so it's just by developing these networks and then a lot of trial and error and testing. And that's part of what led to Mass becoming some architecture students to a very interdisciplinary team. We've built out all of the different engineering disciplines are there. We've had amazing collaborations with firms like Arup and others that have been interested in trying to explore a lot of these things. So they, for example, they were involved in the RECA project. And then because we're responsible for the means and methods, as you would say, we're able to figure it out and deploy it in ways that would maybe be more challenging otherwise.
Thank you for that wonderful talk. Towards the end, you said something like the structure of our practice is integral to the design. And I think that you started to address my question in response to the last question, but it was about what is your model for forging the relationships, establishing trust, and creating these clearly super effective partnerships that allow you to be channeling local knowledge into the design rather than sweeping in as the experts.
Yeah, I think a couple of different things I could speak to there. I think one is about the partnerships, and I think particularly when we started, we were working with hospitals with the Rwandan government and a nonprofit called Partners in Health. And Partners in Health is a nonprofit, had a number of co-founders, but most people associated with Dr. Paul Farmer, who sadly passed away a few years ago. And they really developed this kind of idea of deep connection to place. And Paul describes it as accompaniment. He talks about, which based on their work in the 80s in Haiti, where he describes it as a journey that might be long and challenging, but the destination will be determined by the person being accompanied, not the accompaniteur or the expert. And really, they were our mentors. It was going there and kind of unlearning what we thought design and construction was meant to do, where they taught us to view each choice as an opportunity to try to expand the social, economic, environmental, educational impact that really kind of flipped on its head the way we think about these things, to be deeply engaged. And that idea of immersion and proximity and accompaniment is something that really became essential to the way we think about doing work. So we really only work with partners who already have deep connections to place. And I was having lunch with a few students today, and we were talking about this. And I was talking about working in Haiti after the earthquake in 2010, where you had a kind of flood of foreigners coming in with good intentions and a desire to do something positive, but a lot of failures. And we, I think, were successful in getting projects done there because we were working with a Haitian organization that knew its community, had worked there for close to 40 years. And so we weren't bringing that aspect. We were bringing certain skills to help them think about how to build better health care. But they already, they allowed us a way to build trust through their association and then to get to know the community and the place and to lean on them to kind of know what could be possible. So I think that's like part of your question. And the other part is, MASS is pretty unusual. It's a nonprofit that allows us to do a lot of different things. Among them, we take a lot more risk, like being the contractor in this case, which meant us ultimately, even having to fund some of the construction. These projects we managed through COVID. And so we're also having to manage public health efforts of, thousands of people doing contact tracing and testing on site, busing people to the Capitol to get vaccinated. A lot of things that we didn't necessarily imagine when we first got going, but because our, mandate is impact and not profit, we're able to figure out different ways of doing that. So, this year, our budget's around $18 million. We'll have about 8 million of that is from philanthropy. So, almost half of our funding is coming from grants that come straight to MASS. RECA was a $72 million grant that came to MASS. So we managed the whole project. But that structure means that we're able to invest in what we call our design labs, these 8 thematic areas of practice where we do kind of 3 types of work. Research, trying to understand the kind of systemic issue and what's the opportunity for design to address it. Then we do what we call catalyst projects that are intended to be kind of proof of concept that can become a model. And then systems change work, which is making films, giving lectures, publishing books, doing the policy work to try and advocate for this to become a part of the market through policy that is demanded or adopted in the case of the marketplace. And so it's just a completely different kind of model driven by different end goals. Yep.
Thank you so much.
Yep.
Hi, I have a question. I'm really fascinated by the picture you have right now. And can you tell us more about the logic behind how the total organization of the landscape came to become this way?
In this particular image, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Sure. So there's the gallery and exhibit space is in this building. Then you have their kind of research center and labs, and then you have the educational spaces. Those are kind of the 3 different buildings. This is down at the foothills outside of the national park. So, this is what it looked like before, like the more, smallholder farms. And so, I showed that diagram. Let me see if I can get back to it very easily. Oh, here. Oh. There we go. So the idea was to try to represent each of these different zones. So the paths are designed for visitors and students to be able to navigate those paths and see all of the different habitats that the gorillas live in. And there's like VR stations along the way where you can kind of use cell phones or iPads that they give you to actually see, gorillas within that kind of habitat. The other thing that Sierra, who was doing the voiceover of the film and was the landscape architect leading the project, also talked about the wetland system over here. So we're treating all the wastewater on site. Those are kind of the main ideas. I think there was, okay, yeah.
Thank you for your presentation and for the lunch as well. The question I have is, can you talk about like the kind of contractor work of managing means and methods and any pain points you've faced in denser urban contexts as opposed to like more rural landscapes where you have like enough space to splay out, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, I'm trying to think if we built anything in an urban context. Probably not. Rwanda is kind of an interesting, to describe it in that terms is kind of challenging because it's the most densely populated country in Africa, but yet appears very rural. And there's really only one city, but people live everywhere. So it's not urbanized, but it's just evenly distributed. So, even in this image, I mean, there's people that live everywhere in, very smallholder plots. But yeah, I mean, it's like all kinds of challenges from becoming a contractor. I think from getting materials there, having to confront scarcity of availability. We made this big bet on building out of wood, which is kind of counterintuitive if we're talking about deforestation. But there was a new sustainable forestry program that had a 30-year plan of harvesting on the fringe of this national park. And we had this whole plan to work with them. We sized the members of the trusses based on what would fit in their kiln. And then they went out of business. And so then we're having to identify in Kenya and Tanzania sustainable tree farms and figure out how to get them there. There's not grading of wood the way we do things here. So our engineers were having to go to the mills, grade the wood, measure the moisture, we had to test all kinds of things on site. So yeah, we could test some things in labs, but we also had all of these more analog types of tests to see does the wood behave the way our textbook says it will? Things like that. Managing thousands of people. I talked about COVID. All kinds of things you don't expect, but that we had this kind of ambulance chasing lawyer that got a bunch of people to sue us. So we had, I think, 50 different cases that we had to navigate. All 50 got thrown out, but it took, I think, 4 years. So, all these things that you just can't necessarily anticipate, but all kinds of amazing things too, of discoveries and the type of things that then are really the legacy of these projects. The groups that go on to start their own cooperatives, the crew that got trained in rammed earth have their own company now. They're building boutique hotels in the airport and doing stuff all over the country. So those are the things that are really rewarding to see. And the industry has totally changed. So when we started a construction company, it was because it was really hard to get things of quality done well. And now it's much bigger marketplace. So we're actually not sustaining the kind of GC model because we feel like the market has expanded to a place where it doesn't depend on us being a part of it. Will we do it again? It's possible. We're talking with the Fosse Fund about a second phase of work, and they asked us if we build back up the construction company. So we're thinking about it. I know you had a question. Oh, okay,
Thank
right
you.
here. And then we can...
Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation, very inspirational projects. And more particularly the timely and necessary wisdom for architecture that you are sharing with us. I would like to rephrase the question that was just posed, which is that the majority of our students, I think, will have their practices in urban and suburban context. So I wonder if you can imagine what an architecture of abundance would look like in such context, and what type of partnership may be necessary or ideal with planning.
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think that is the luxury of these projects, is we have a lot of space. But I think like the main thing, and this came up at lunch too, is that, I think there's just as much, probably even more impact, actually certainly more impact happening through kind of traditional market commercial projects. It's just not as visible on the site. It's the choices you're making about all the things that are being used. So every one of those materials comes from a landscape and is having an impact on an ecosystem, on a culture, on a community, from where it's being extracted. And so I think whether you're working on an office building in DC or a luxury condo, you're probably having more impact than we're having. And it's about like just asking the questions of, where does this come from? I wrote in Architect maybe a couple of years ago now this story about provenance, and talked about Carrara marble, this thing we like really prize, and how destructive of an industry it has become in Italy. It's all owned by multinationals now. It's causing all kinds of flooding and other impacts. It's no longer like a good job to be in. The value of the craft has gone way down. So here's this thing that like probably many of us have like spec'd for a kitchen somewhere that is actually being quite destructive, and is no longer about like a local culture or a place or craft or any of the things that it once maybe held. And so I think, you have to think about that from the kind of minimize harm standpoint. From the, actually doing good, I mean, I think the idea is that you as this is a relatively small site, that you could have actually have a landscape, whether it's on a roof or in the median of a road, that still contributes something. But I think I agree with, maybe your question, that we have to start thinking of something beyond carbon credits. Like that to say that we need, and that has to be like policy based, to say that like to have the rights to develop something means we have to regenerate something somewhere else, in the case that you can't do it on site. So yeah, I mean, this is like insetting versus like offsetting. Yeah.
You spoke close to the beginning of the lecture about how Rwanda is experiencing rapid population growth. How much do you have to account for that in your design, especially in possibilities of eventual increases in urbanism? Because you spoke about how the population is right now pretty evenly spread out, but that might change in the future. How do you account for that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, I don't know that I can speak to kind of the way that at least I understand the government is thinking about it. I mean, they are encouraging urbanization, but not just flocking to the capital. So they have a kind of goal of creating these secondary cities and having kind of industrial like focus areas, so that there's a reason to go there, as a way of trying to address this. But like the agriculture university, that's basically their goal, is to create agricultural entrepreneurs, not better subsistence farmers, but people that can actually increase yields on less land so that you have more food, but using less space. The thing that we're actually involved with is, this is called Volcanoes National Park, where you could see that image of this. So that's like the national park boundary. So we have been working with the government for a master plan to actually expand the national park, to move that buffer zone, that line out. It's obviously like rife with all kinds of challenges because people live there, for example. So you're having to understand how like resettlement will work, as well as all of the kind of regenerative design practices. So I mean that's kind of the high level of the way people are thinking about things. But the kind of smallholder farmer model like just doesn't work to have 70% of the people trying to produce their own food in tiny plots of land. Yep.
I kind of have a two-part question. I was wondering what drew you to working in Rwanda specifically, and also if you were to look back from all the projects that you've ever done, what would you do differently?
When I was in grad school, one of my classmates met Paul Farmer, the doctor. He said they were starting to work in Rwanda. They'd actually never worked with architects, even though they had built hospitals. And they invited us to volunteer. And it just became so evidently more rewarding than what I had thought I was, whatever I had thought I was going to do, that I just never looked back. But it wasn't part of some grand, strategy. It's just kind of organically evolved. What would I go back and do differently? It's a good question. I mean, there's like, probably like every architect, there's like clients I'd rather not have worked for. So, but I don't know. I don't have like a ton of regrets. I mean, I think every challenge, regardless of how daunting, at least thus far, has been educational. So, yeah. Yeah, I don't know where the mic is, but sorry, back there, and then we can come up here.
Yeah. So it looks like a lot of your architecture is focused on sort of helping shift a culture, providing opportunities to help conservation as these countries develop. In Africa, there's a lot of concerns about poaching or illegal resource extraction as well, not just what is legal and destructive, but what is illegal and is happening. So how do you see architecture as a preventative measure for these illegal things that go on in these countries?
Yeah, well, one, I'd just say, I mean, this is like a very narrow slice of our work that is like a lecture kind of about the book that's about climate action and conservation. So there's, it's basically one of the 8 labs. So there are a bunch of other things we could talk about, but on that, I mean, that's the entire idea of the Ilima School. It's a part of this African Wildlife Fund school program, which is putting schools into places that are under threat for those reasons of, whether it's land deforestation for farming but they're all centered on, endangered species that are threatened by poaching and other things. And so it's through education and creating alternatives, like better alternatives to poaching, that is kind of their theory of change. I mean, we've also built a research campus in the Serengeti that's actually looking at kind of human-wildlife conflict. And so it's like the migration like goes right through the campus, but it's about studying these very issues. So what is the role of architecture in doing that? I mean, I think it's like proliferating biodiversity. It's like, that's what the landscape is doing. It's not trying to be preventative. It's trying to be like regenerative. But I think a lot of the clients we're working with and the governments we're working with, they're focused more in the kind of, anti-poaching like programs. And Rwanda, I mean, I don't think that's really an issue in Rwanda. It's like incredibly tightly regulated. Like, in the film, you saw the people like in the camo, but those are all like rangers and researchers that, monitor and track the gorillas, and the silverback or the mountain gorilla is like one of the great success stories of conservation where it's like rebounding. So. Yep.
Hi. So one thing that I was really interested in is the way that you en masse invest in existing social and economic infrastructures. I think that's a really unique aspect of the way you're approaching a holistic, framework. But it does seem that the context, the social and economic context of the countries that you're working in, is vastly different from the American context. And I'm sure there's some similarities that I would love to know, like what your insights would be and how you would take your model and bring it into an American context, whether it's an urban context or a rural context in America, but the way in which like capitalism and colonialism has functioned in the States with a settler still in power is a very different context to countries where indigenous independence has kind of happened, and there's different economic structures as well that are existing there, and like different kind of standards of like a dignified job that I think rule an American economic context as well, or complicate it, maybe not rule it. So I guess, yeah, what are some of your insights in how you might like use your work as a model for an approach to an American context?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I'd try to answer. It's still working? Kind of two. I feel like I have to respond to that in kind of two different ways. I mean, one is talking about kind of native communities, which isn't my personal area of expertise, but we do have our Sustainable Native Communities Lab that's run by your distinguished alumni and Joseph Kunkel. And so we're, involved in projects based on land back and other types of principles like that in native populations like throughout the country. So I'm sure you can learn more about that and some of those projects on our website, and a couple of them are featured in the event we hosted in November, and there's films about work we're doing in like Standing Rock and the Northern Cheyenne Healing Trail, and a number of other projects that are kind of focused on that as a specific thing. I think like related to what I'm talking about here, which I'll just simplify into the kind of notion of provenance, like where things come from and who makes them. I totally acknowledge, like, rarely do you have the chance to control like every input. And that's just like virtually impossible here. It's virtually impossible for even many of the manufacturers to know where all their own inputs come from. Like the complexity of the materials that are the status quo in the US are extremely opaque, and it requires like all kinds of regulatory work to make it more transparent. We're involved with the Design for Freedom initiative, which is focused on eliminating forced labor from the building supply chain. So that's like one of the mechanisms to look at that from a labor standpoint. But I think, these are kind of like the Rika took the Alima project, which was small and difficult, and like pushed it to the limit of what we've been able to do so far. I don't know if I'll ever be able to do that again in my career. Like it's like such an outlier project. And I think the way we think of it here is like, we look at the process and we look at where we can move the needle. And it's not going to be like utopian. We're going to have to make compromises. And I think we think of the idea of like local much more broadly. And I am actually kind of critical of assuming hyper-local is good. Like having a product from farther away that has a very ethical, sustainable process would be better than firing some bricks on site, like from all the metrics. So I think like while we don't have the opportunity to be like, you know, sourcing everything from the state that we're working in, we have access to many more things, and we can kind of start to interrogate that supply chain and try to see where can we advance this. And I think we try to, while not everything can be made by local artisans, most projects don't have anything made by somebody local. So like getting something in there is like a small win. And so, you know, I was at lunch, we were talking about the New Lots Library in Brooklyn. You know, we proposed like, hey, why wouldn't we have like furniture designed by people from New York? That was like fairly novel as like an idea in a place that has all kinds of designers. And so I think it starts by just like at least asking the questions like, where do things come from? Who makes them? What are those processes doing to advance those local economies, those industries of craft, those landscapes, and like find the places to do something that challenges the status quo, even if it's not, you know, every choice that you're able to do that.
Alan, thank you so much, not only for the projects and the paradigms you're sharing today, but also for the fall, for the teaching that you brought, and it really enriched our community. So thank you very much.
I know, I was like.